As we report today, the official unemployment figures are nothing short of shattering. And as I've just mentioned to Devon, the unofficial rate is probably 10 to 15 percentage points higher. The numbers come as we continue to experience a recession, with the economy having recently shrunk by over 16%. I want to bring into the conversation now Gina Schoeman, an economist at Citibank. Gina, a very good afternoon to you. How are you reading these numbers this afternoon then?
Well, it's a very sad of affairs for South Africa. I think, given that we had already seen the GDP numbers contract by 17.1% on a year-on-year basis, 2.2 million jobs lost is already a very sad state of affairs for an economy that already has such a high unemployment rate. And I just heard you speaking about, what types of definitions should we look at here? And I certainly think for an economy that has always struggled with employment, the expanded definition is always the more important one to look at, because it is not always someone's natural tendency to be discouraged from seeking work. In the lockdown, certainly in some parts of the lockdown, it was illegal to leave your house, so you couldn't actually go and look for work. But there are also a lot of structural reasons South Africa faces as to why many individuals in this country are unable to actually go out and seek work. Public transport being just one of those, our spatial development. So, if you put this all together, for the year as a whole, looking forward into the second half of the year, maybe we'll get a bit lucky when some people go out for work and actually find a job. But as a year as a whole, we're still expecting a total of 1.5 million jobs lost.
Okay, it doesn't matter which definition you're looking at. Now let's look on the causal effect as far as South Africa's economy is concerned. This does not bode well.
No, not at all. And I'll tell you one area of this that we're focusing very much on is that obviously in Q2, knowing that you would get jobs lost, Treasury had already projected some very large job loss numbers. That was part of the reason why social grants were topped up and why a new social grant was put into the system. That's why we saw a lot of unemployment relief put into the fiscal package. The key now is trying to work out whether this can actually be unwound. And if not, if there is too much job loss devastation, too much unemployment on the ground, if Treasury is unable to stop these temporary top-ups in social grants and stop the unemployment relief, if they have to start extending this, then our fiscal situation gets worse. So in the end, what we actually need is a proper reform plan. It's one thing to talk about what this economy needs to maybe grow 1 quarter or half a year ahead of us. But in the end, we need a lever for job growth. If we don't get that, household consumption is not sustainable and investment is simply not sustainable.
Let's assume the top-up strategy continues. What's the worst-case scenario then?
Well, if you simply extend all the social grants and on a top-up basis, plus the social distress grant for COVID-19, if you just extend those by another 6 months, you're looking at adding a full percent on top of a budget deficit to GDP ratio, which is already sitting close to 15% of GDP. Now, the trouble with this, from a fiscal perspective, is how are you going to finance it? There's only so much debt that you can take on as a country without going into literally a fiscal crisis. But then, of course, you always have the other hand of the story, and that is the fact that if you have individuals who are hungry, who cannot find jobs, that is a big social problem, which is going to have social ramifications. It's probably going to lead to a lot of tension between your trade unions in the wage bargaining negotiations, which could lead to strike action. So government is facing a very fine balance here between what they must do on the fiscal side versus what they must do to try and alleviate some of the pain that we've seen so far this year.
Short term, and this is a quick question and a quick answer, are you optimistic about anything, or is this about as bad as it gets?
I'm optimistic that at least the second half of this year is showing a bit more of a firm recovery than what we had expected. And I'm a bit optimistic because lockdown eased sooner than what we thought. I'm also not too concerned about a second wave in South Africa. 2021 will recover, but I think where we need to see is this NEDLAC-endorsed economic recovery plan by government. We actually now need to see it presented. We need the details.
All right, we'll take whatever form of optimism anyone can give us. So Gina Schoeman, thank you, economist at Citibank. This is